Hello my lovelies and welcome back to Sondering Tarot. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. Today we're going to be covering only 10 mass market tarot decks. So if I had to get rid of basically my entire collection, this is the 10 mass market tarot decks I would keep. This is based off my 2022 collection. And maybe one of these days I will find a way to stop my anxiety and do a only top 10 mass market decks that is both tarot and oracle, but for right now I struggled with doing just 10 tarot decks, and oh boy, after watching other people do this, I understand your anxiety. Oh boy, yeah, that kind of hurt. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. And I'd like to remind everybody this is in no particular order. So one of the first decks I would keep, which was originally an indie deck, is Chris Ann's Light Seers Tarot. A lot of people will recognize this deck. It was originally a Kickstarter deck. So let's zoom you on in here. Here's the lovely backings. This is a more modern deck. It's actually one of the first modern decks I ever bought that I could actually feel connected to. And believe it or not, this is my air element deck in my collection. This deck feels very young to me, but I can still connect to it very well. And despite not liking color and this deck having some pretty bright, bold color, it doesn't bug me. So yes, creation, ideas, imagination. This is what this deck helps me tap into. So don't be surprised if you see basically my 5 elements decks in my collection in this list. They're there for a reason in my collection. They rank high. That said, here is another one. The Heaven and Earth Tarot. Believe it or not, this used to be my spirituality deck. However, it's since been replaced by the Unfolding Tarot. That is currently still an indie deck. It is going mass market by the end of the year. So for right now, I can't put the Unfolding Tarot on this list. So Heaven and Earth definitely is on here. This was not the first deck that I purchased. However, it is one that I basically learned to train on. It's got a good guidebook. It's got lots of information in it. And even though it's got the more traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery and a muted color palette, I actually love this deck. It is fantastic to work with. And I do love the fact that you get little titles on some of these. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. So, I mean, oppression for the Ten of Wands. You gotta love it. It works very well for a deck. Despair and Cruelty. Pleasure for the Six of Cups. That one can be argued. And as you can tell, I've used this deck quite a lot. All the edges and stuff are all banged up. I've actually gotten a lot of insight out of the Heaven and Earth Tarot. Alright, and next deck we have Shawn MacKenzie's The Tarot of Dragons. I had such a hard-on for this deck when I realized this was going to be my fire element deck. I wanted it so bad the first time I saw a flip through, and I went, ooh, dragons, dragons, and this really felt like dragon energy, felt like fire energy. And I wanted it so bad. And luckily, I was able to get this as a Christmas gift from a family member. And I love the fact that there's no riders. Oh, am I holding it completely upside down to where you see no uprights? And I know this deck calls for not reading reversals. That's how Shawn designed it. However, she based this off RWS. So if you know the reversals in RWS, you can read this deck with reversals. I often ask my guides, my ancestors, whether or not I am going to be rereading reversals when I go to use this deck. And 9 times out of 10, they tell me to use reversals. So to each their own on that extent. I love this 8 of Wands. That's fabulous. And there's a lot of bold color in this deck too, but it's not overpowering for me, which is really weird. Certain ranges of color are just too bold, too bright, and I get distracted. Whereas something like this, even though it has lots of color and some of it can be bold, it's not overly done. I can connect with this just fine. And believe it or not, even though this is my fire element in my collection for a deck, the strength of this deck is actually dreams for me. And I know I've confessed some of these, what they are in my collection. If you have some of these, go ahead and let me know down below. If you have them, what is their strength or what is their weakness in your collection? Because I know everyone's energy is different. So just because it's a strength for me does not mean it is a strength for you. All right, and here's one I mulled over for a bit, but I do believe every single person should have one tarot deck that is as close to a traditional RWS deck as you can get. So for me, that's the Radiant Wise Spirit Tarot. And I have this in a mini. So I will hold these up here. They just did a little bit of color correcting and re-highlighted the lines, so it's a little bit clearer in some areas. So for it, getting to closest to the most traditional deck there is, this is it for me. And I use this very well. And believe it or not, the strength of this deck is spirituality for me. And the weakness is love. But this is a good little deck to own, to have. I know some people consider the traditional RWS kind of as a neutral deck. Like I said, for me, the weakness in this deck is love. So if I'm doing something with love, I will not reach for this deck because I know it will have issues trying to convey that type of topic, that type of energy. It just doesn't jive well with me. But anything else is pretty much, it's fair game. Or if I want a reminder of, say, like a traditional meaning, I can still pull the card from this deck and pair it with the same card from another deck and see how they differ. Use it kind of as a training tool, which is another reason why I do believe everyone should have at least one deck that is close to the traditional deck. And let's face it, there's quite a large number of RWS clones out there to choose from. Okay, and the next deck, tapping into witch energy. I have more than one deck that does this in my collection. In fact, I have the Greenwich, and I had a little bit of a agonizing toss-up moment between the Witch's Tarot and the Greenwich, but I connect more to the Witch's Tarot. Granted, I've had it longer, which makes sense. But when it comes to imagery, that's also probably leaning more into the Greenwich. However, when it comes to meanings and connections and being readable as a deck, I connect better with the Witch's Tarot. So that's the reason why this one beat out the other one, even though I stood there for like 5 minutes going, oh crap, which one, which one, which one? I know it has to be one of these two, which one? And this is the one I went with. Granted, I can do this same video a year from now when I have all the decks from 2023 and redo this video, and you may see some different decks for my top choices, which is to be expected. But for now, this is what I would choose in this moment. And heaven help me if I do a top 10 only mass market deck video where I have to include oracles, because that's basically a free-for-all. And in fact, this is one of the decks I would love to have in a full size, because right now I just have it in the mini. But it's one that I use often enough that I would like to have both sizes in, and I don't have them in both sizes. I'm sure some of you have decks that are like that you love so much you'd love to have them in both sizes. And one of my favorites, the Mermaid Tarot by Leeza Robertson. This is actually my water element deck. Let's bump you up a little bit. I'm sure I'm out of frame. And because I'm a water sign, this is the deck I feel very much at home with. Just because it is my element. I also love the backings on it. Again, this is a deck that has color, but it's not overly done. So it doesn't bug me at all. So I apparently have a niche when it comes to color palettes. I've discovered this about myself in like the last year of, okay, I can only handle so many really bright decks. Otherwise, my brain just kind of goes haywire and I get distracted. I do have decks that are in different themes. Like this is a mermaid deck. I do have dog decks, cat decks. I have a teddy bear one. I do have ones that are otherwise themed, like my Nightmare Before Christmas deck. But a lot of those, there again, they have to be done in a certain color range for me to be comfortable with them. And even though this Mermaid Tarot is a water element deck, believe it or not, the strength of this deck for me is manifestation. This deck will tell me exactly where the energy is or isn't in any given topic, which is fascinating to have as a deck for a strength. So it's not just water element, oh, spirituality, oh, dreams. It's literally manifestation. Where's the energy and where is it going? Which I have more than one deck that has that as a strength. In fact, another deck that is on this list also has that as its strength. And conveniently, they are actually by the exact same artist. It is another Leeza Robertson deck. You will probably recognize it when we get to it, because it's also a well-known deck. Alright, I knew I had to include a shadow deck, and that is the strength of the Magical Dogs Tarot for me, is shadow work, which is really weird. There's a lot of color in this deck. I mean, it's far more cheery than some of my other decks that do shadow work. However, I think that's one of the reasons why I can connect to this deck a little bit better. Plus, it's cute. It's adorable. I mean, it's dogs. It doesn't matter if you're a dog person or a cat person or, you know, other. I mean, it's dogs. They're totally cute. But like the use of the color and the drawing is fantastic. And it approaches shadow work in a completely different way, which I love from this deck. And like I said, the color palette is there, but it's not overly done. And I love the fact that they did different dogs for each card. It's not all one dog. It's not like they picked a storyline for one single dog going through the journey. You see several different breeds. And everything is depicted to where you can identify the card fairly easy. I know some people have issues with dog decks. They try to find their own dog inside the deck and get disappointed when they don't see a dog close enough to theirs. That has never been my issue with this deck. I've had it for probably about half a year now. I got this as a birthday gift, and I've never had any issue with this. Actually, in fact, I don't think I've even read the entire guidebook. I basically opened this up and cleansed it and started using it right off the bat, and I've had no issues with this deck whatsoever. I interviewed it and found out shadow work, of all things, was the strength of this deck, and I've been able to connect with and read with this deck right out of the gate. It was never one that I had to seriously ponder. I mean, there's a couple cards and stuff that have been renamed. It goes by sky, earth, and fire, sea, you know. So it's got elementals instead of the traditional swords, pentacles, wands, etc. But yeah, this is definitely one I would keep, and it is currently my top deck for shadow work right now. Which is saying a lot, because I've got probably 5 to 7 decks that do shadow work for a strength. Granted, a lot of those are indie decks. And we're going to move right on to the next deck, which is the Force of Enchantment by Lunaea Weatherstone. I have more than one deck of hers. I also have the Mystical Cats Tarot, and I pondered whether or not to keep that one in this top 10 and decided against it. However, the Force of Enchantment right here is my Earth Element deck. So there is a certain quality to this deck. I am still bonding with this deck because I haven't had it that long. I actually bought this after Christmas for myself because I was informed that even though this was my Earth Element deck, nobody had bought it for me. And, well, I wanted it quite a lot sooner than the next time people would buy me a round of tarot decks. So I purchased this one myself. And yes, there is a lot of name changes and whatnot to deal with this deck. And I want to take a slower inventory of this deck because I know there is more to the guidebook. There is a lot of information. Like I know for the Fool card here, she does go into every tree, the plant life in the background, because there is heavy symbolism in the cards. And there's a little bit of, you know, Fae energy in here. There's a little bit, which I have not dabbled in quite extensively as other people. There's definitely that earth quality, nature quality. And I'm sorry, but that this is probably one of my favorite cards out of the entire deck, is the Seeker of Challenges. So the Knight of Swords, if anybody has seen the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you'll know exactly where my brain goes with every single time I've seen this card. I can't unsee it, and there's no getting rid of it, but it makes me laugh. The other thing I love about this deck is that this literally feels like its own world, which I will probably end up doing another video on decks in my collection that have that feeling. Because sometimes we get characters, we get different color palettes, sometimes they break them into suits, sometimes the minors don't jive with the majors, sometimes your color palette's all over the place. But this feels definitely like a forest with, range of life that all live in harmony. There's something to be said for world building, and this is why I want to take a slower time with this deck, and especially to eventually read the entire guidebook in its entirety, because it has that feeling to it. Which is probably the reason why this is my Earth Element deck. Not only does it tap into the Earth Element, but it's its own little world. And I'm usually a book reader, so to have world building skills into a deck, it is fantastic. There's a grounding energy to that, as well as a fantasy realm to that. And to balance the two is really hard. So as I get to know this deck even more, I will probably love how this looks aesthetically as its own world, and then how she's got the guidebook showing that it is its own world as well. Speaking of which, if any of you know any tags or any channels to do a video response to when it comes to world building decks, please comment those down below to me so I know what they are, because I will probably do that video at some point. Alright, and then we have the Soul Cats Tarot. This is the other Leeza Robertson deck. So as I said previously, this deck has a strength of manifestation. And I can read this deck just as well as I do the Mermaid Tarot. So when it comes to Leeza Robertson's decks, apparently I must have a thing. And I do love cats. Cats are my familiar. This does also feel like its own little world. I love the art style. And there's certain cards that are depicted really well that really jive. Even some of the court cards, which, let's face it, some of us don't always connect to court cards very well, just because you can read them as traits or people. And believe it or not, I've got probably a card or two in this deck that are court cards that I would probably pick as favorites for court cards. One of them being the Queen of Cups, if I see it. That's Temperance. That's Queen of Wands. And I love how well this deck is done, especially some of the nuances that really you look at it and go, yeah, that's a cat. Knight of Cups. I really love this Devil card. I must have passed it in the chunk somewhere. Granted, I intend to do There you go. There's one of the cards that definitely says that's a cat. The Tower. It's literally a cat knocking something off the table. This deck is cute. It's adorable. It's very enjoyable. And yes, it does have certain cards that really give me a chuckle at the same time. And I like that. And it's funny that I end up with some themed decks in here in my top 10. Oh, and there you go. There's the Queen of Cups. I love this card because she's just sitting on a cushion, all nice and comfortable. She's nonplussed, and she's in a boat rocking around in really choppy water. And I don't know, there's something about a human just sitting on a throne holding a cup with a raging ocean around him that isn't the best for me to connect to, whereas this card right here, I get it. So go figure. But I find it amusing that I have so many themed decks. I have dragons, I have mermaids, I have cats, I have dogs for themes. And yes, even witches, because I do have the Witches Tarot here as well. And last but not least, this is another deck that I would love to have the full-size version of, and because it is a miniature, here, let me zoom in so I don't have to break my wrists holding it up to the camera and hoping I'm on frame. And that's the Gilded Tarot Royale by Ciro Marchetti. He's done several decks, and I've seen a lot of his decks. This is the only one I currently own, even though I do have a hard-on for one of his other ones. But I do love the way this one reads enough that I would enjoy this as a full-size deck as well. I mean, some people don't like his art style, but I kind of like his fantasy vibe that he puts off with his artwork. I tap into it fairly well. Again, he does have a range in his color palette, but it's not like somebody took the brightest colors and slapped paint on a canvas and left it all splotchy and abstract and to where it would be distracting. He uses his colors with purpose. I've seen a few of his decks where people pick out colors for chakra references very easily. And he does have quite a bit of symbolism in this deck, actually, and I think in most of his decks, to be honest. And there is one card in this deck that I have basically grown attached to, and it's because it represents a person that I was informed of right after I got this deck. So I do have favorites out of this, but that's just because of who it represents, not necessarily based on the card itself, if that makes any sense to anybody. It's quite fun. In fact, I think, there we go. Oh, this is the card that I was talking about, the Knight of Pentacles. And if anybody else has more Ciro Marchetti decks, which one's your favorite? Which ones do you dislike? Because I have been contemplating getting more of his decks. Granted, there is at least one that I have a hard-on for. I just haven't taken the plunge. So if any of you would care to comment on that, please do so. I would appreciate it. And I keep seeing, like, Amazon keeps having just the mini listed. So if anybody knows where they've got the full size listed and available, please also let me know. So as far as my deck collection for 2022, these are the decks I would have to definitely keep if I was forced to. And if any of you actually made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. If you have any of these decks, let me know. How do you enjoy them? If you have these decks and rehome them, let me know why. If you have any of these decks, let me know what the strengths and weaknesses is for you and how they function in your collection. If you have some of these in your collection, but you wouldn't put them in a top 10, then tell me why. I would love to know why. Feel free to disagree with me on any of the points I made on any of these decks. Alright, my lovelies, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.